The little girl didn't speak. She didn't cry. She didn't ask for anything. Emily found her on the steps of the chapel one frosty winter morning, wrapped in a threadbare blanket, a crumpled note clutched in her tiny hand. The note simply read, "Please take care of her. I can't." No name. No explanation. Just a child, around 5 years old, with huge, hazel eyes that seemed to hold secrets far too great for someone so small. Emily called the police. She contacted Child Protective Services. She did everything by the book. But while she waited, something happened that would change her life forever. The little girl, who hadn't uttered a single word since being found, looked up at Emily and smiled. A small smile, almost imperceptible, but laden with something Emily couldn't quite put her finger on. Recognition. As if the child knew her. As if she'd been waiting for her. If you've ever felt an instant connection with someone, as if you've known them from another life, this video will change everything you think about the nature of souls. Emily Carter was 29 years old and worked as a housekeeper at Caldwell Manor. She'd been there for 2 years. It was a good job, fair pay. An absentee boss for the most part. Edward Caldwell, heir to a hotel empire, lived alone in that huge manor and rarely interacted with the staff. They said he was cold, distant, that he'd closed himself off from the world after a string of failed relationships and the discovery that he couldn't have children. Emily had never exchanged more than a few formal words with him in 2 years. But that morning, when Child Protective Services said it would take at least a week to process the abandoned child situation, Emily made an impulsive decision. "I can take care of her," she said, "temporarily, until you find her parents or a foster family." The social workers hesitated. It wasn't standard procedure. But the little girl, who had rejected all human contact since being found, was holding Emily's hand with a surprising strength for someone so small, as if she didn't want to let go, as if she was afraid of losing something precious. "All right," the social worker agreed. "1 week, but we need a permanent address and background checks." Emily gave the address of Caldwell Manor. Her apartment was too small. And anyway, she spent most of her time there. Maybe she could arrange a room in the back for the little girl. What she didn't expect was Edward Caldwell's reaction. "You brought a child into my house," he said when he found her in the hallway that afternoon. It wasn't a question. It was a statement, loaded with something Emily couldn't quite identify. "I'm sorry, Mr. Caldwell. It's temporary. A week at most. She was abandoned and I couldn't just..." Emily stopped talking because Edward wasn't looking at her. He was looking at the little girl, and on his face was an expression she'd never seen in 2 years of working there. Pain. An old, deep pain that seemed to have been unearthed without warning. "What's her name?" he asked. His voice was hoarse. "We don't know. She doesn't speak. She hasn't said a word since she was found." Edward knelt down. He got down to the little girl's level. He looked into her hazel eyes as if he were searching for something, as if he were trying to remember something impossible. And then it happened. The little girl, who hadn't spoken in weeks according to the note, who hadn't said anything to the police, to the social workers, to Emily, opened her mouth and said one word. "Daddy." Emily felt her blood run cold. Edward stumbled backward as if he'd been punched in the stomach, and the little girl continued to look at him with those huge eyes, waiting for an answer that transcended any logic. "What?" Edward whispered. "What did you say?" The little girl reached her little arms out to him. "Daddy, you took so long to find me." Edward Caldwell, the cold, distant man who barely spoke to the staff, did something no one expected. He fell to his knees. He hugged the little girl and began to cry, crying as if something inside him had finally broken, or finally been fixed. Emily watched the scene, unable to move, unable to process what she was seeing. A child who had never seen Edward in her life, calling him Daddy. And Edward, reacting as if it made perfect sense in the world. "Mr. Caldwell," she ventured, "I don't understand. Do you know this girl?" Edward lifted his face. Tears streamed freely. And when he answered, his voice had a different quality, a certainty that shouldn't exist. "Not in this life," he said. "Not in this life." Emily felt a chill run down her spine. Not in this life. What did that mean? The little girl was still in Edward's arms, but now her eyes had turned to Emily, and in them was the same expression of recognition, the same impossible certainty. "Mommy," the little girl said, "you took so long too. If you're getting chills right now, comment chills, because what comes next will leave you speechless." Emily took a step back. Her heart was pounding. Her mind was trying to find a rational explanation for what was happening. "I'm not your mommy," she said. Her voice trembled. "I found you this morning, at the chapel. You don't know me." The little girl tilted her head, a gesture that seemed too old for a 5-year-old. "I've known you for a long time, Mommy. I was just waiting for you to find me." Edward stood up. He was still holding the little girl's hand. And when he looked at Emily, there was something in his eyes that made her want to run away and stay at the same time. "I have dreams," he said, "ever since I can remember. Dreams with a woman and a child. Always the same woman. Always the same child. And in the dream, I know they're mine. My wife. My daughter. But when I wake up, they don't exist. Not in this life." Emily swallowed hard. This was madness. Pure madness. People didn't recognize families from past lives. Children didn't remember parents they never had. This wasn't possible. But then why did she also have those dreams? Dreams that had haunted her since childhood. Dreams with an old house, with a man who loved her, with a hazel-eyed girl she rocked to sleep. And at the end of the dreams, always the same scene, the sick girl, the fever that wouldn't break, the crying that grew quieter and quieter until it stopped. Emily had never told anyone about those dreams. She thought they were just the product of a fertile imagination. She thought they didn't mean anything. But now, looking at the little girl who was calling her Mommy, looking at Edward who was crying as if he had found something lost for centuries, she began to doubt. "What's your name, honey?" Emily asked the little girl, her voice barely a whisper. The girl smiled, a smile that held more wisdom than a 5-year-old should possess. "Luna. My name is Luna. You chose that name for me, because I was born on a full moon night. You always said I was your light in the darkness." Edward made a choked sound. Emily turned to him. "What is it?" "The dreams," he said. "In the dreams, the little girl is named Luna. I've never told anyone that. How does she know?" "Because I was there," Luna replied simply. "I remember everything. I remember our house. I remember the garden where you taught me how to plant flowers, Daddy. I remember the songs you sang to me to sleep, Mummy. I remember everything." Emily felt her legs give way. She had to lean against the wall. "That's not possible," she said. "You're 5 years old. You can't remember things that never happened. They did happen," Luna said. "It was just a long time ago, before I was born in this body, before you were born in these bodies. But it was us. It was us. And I promised I'd find you again." Edward looked at Emily. In his eyes was a question that didn't need to be spoken aloud. "You feel it too, don't you? You know this is true, don't you?" Emily wanted to deny it. She wanted to say it was crazy, that children made up stories, that there were no past lives, no soulmates, no families that reunited across the centuries. But she couldn't, because deep down, in a place she had never allowed anyone to see, she knew that little girl was hers. She knew that man was hers. She knew they had been a family before, and that death had separated them. until now. The next part of this story contains revelations that will make you question everything you believe about life, death, and the love that transcends both. If you're not ready to cry, it's better to stop here. In the following days, Luna began to talk more, much more, as if a dam had burst after years of silence. But what she said wasn't what you'd expect from a 5-year-old. She described places she had never visited in this life. A house with white walls and blue wooden shutters, a garden with orange trees, a fountain in the center of the patio where doves came to drink water. Edward listened to each description, his face growing paler and paler, because he knew those places. From the dreams, the same dreams he had had since childhood. She also described people, the neighbor who sold fabrics, the woman who baked bread and gave it to the children on the street, the priest at the chapel who had a scar on his face from when he was a soldier. Details a 5-year-old couldn't invent, details that seemed to come from another time, another life. And then Luna started to draw. Emily gave her paper and crayons, expecting her to make normal children's drawings, flowers, houses, stick figure families. But Luna drew something different. She drew 3 figures in front of a house, a tall man with dark hair, a woman with long hair, and a little girl between them, holding their hands. The house was the same one she had described. White walls, blue shutters, orange trees in the background, and the faces of the figures, as simple as the childlike strokes were unmistakable. Edward, Emily, and Luna herself. "That's the day you brought me the new dress," Luna explained, pointing to the drawing. "The yellow dress with flowers. I loved that dress. I wore it until I got sick." Emily felt tears streaming down her face without permission. "Got sick?" Luna nodded. Her small face grew serious. "The fever came. A lot of people in the town got sick. I was one of the first. You took care of me day and night. But the fever wouldn't go away. And I got weaker and weaker, until one day I fell asleep and didn't wake up again." She said this with a calmness that shouldn't have been possible, as if she were describing something that had happened to someone else. In a sense, it had. Edward was standing with his back to them, looking out the window. His shoulders were shaking. "And then?" Emily asked, even though she knew she shouldn't, even though she knew the answer would destroy her. "What happened then?" "You were very sad," Luna said. "You cried a lot, and you got sick too, because you took care of me until the end. The same fever that took me, took you too." She paused, looked at Edward, then at Emily. "But before I fell asleep forever, we made a promise. You held my hand and said you would find me again. In another life. Another time. It didn't matter how long it took. You promised you would never forget me. And you," Emily whispered. "What did you promise?" Luna smiled, the purest smile Emily had ever seen. "I promised I would find you first, that I would remember everything, that I would wait as long as it took, and that when we met again, I would call you Mommy and Daddy, so you would know it was me. So you would know that the promise was kept." Edward turned around him. His face was streaked with tears. 200 years, he said, his voice barely audible. "You waited 200 years. "I would have waited longer," Luna replied. "I would have waited forever, because you are my parents. In every life. Forever." Do you believe in past lives? After hearing this story, it's impossible not to consider the possibility. Comment your opinion. Edward spent that night sleepless. He stayed in his study until the sun came up, surrounded by old papers, family documents he had never been interested in reading. The Caldwells were an old family, merchants who had made their fortune in the 19th century and maintained that fortune through the generations. Edward knew that. What he didn't know were the details. Details that now seemed terribly important. He found the record around 4 in the morning, a yellow document, almost disintegrating at the edges. A death record from 1820. 3 names, 3 dates of death, all in the same month. Edward Caldwell, 38 years old, yellow fever. Emily Caldwell, 29 years old, yellow fever. Luna Caldwell, 5 years old, yellow fever. Edward dropped the document as if it were on fire. His hands were shaking so badly he could barely hold it. The names were the same. The ages were the same. The cause of death was exactly what Luna had described. Coincidence, his rational mind tried to argue. It has to be coincidence. The Caldwells are a big family. There must have been several Edwards over the centuries, but he knew it wasn't coincidence. He knew it, with a certainty that went beyond logic. That document wasn't about other Caldwells. It was about him, about Emily, about Luna, in another life, in another time. But the same people. He kept searching and found more. An old photograph. No, not a photograph. A daguerreotype. One of the earliest ways to capture images. And in it, blurred by time, but still recognizable, was a family. A man, a woman, a little girl. The faces were impossible to identify for sure. The image was too old, too worn, but the position of the figures was exactly the same as Luna's drawing. The tall man in the center, the woman beside him, the little girl in front, holding both their hands. And behind them, almost invisible but still there, a house, white walls, blue windows. Edward closed his eyes. He felt tears streaming down again. How many times had he cried in the last 24 hours? More than in his entire adult life, combined. But these tears were different. They weren't of pain. They were of relief, of recognition, of finally understanding something he'd carried his whole life without knowing what it was. The emptiness he felt, the sensation that something was missing, the inability to connect with other people, to form lasting relationships, to find someone who completed the hole in his chest. It wasn't a defect. It wasn't coldness. It was longing. Longing for people he didn't consciously remember. Longing for a family he'd lost 200 years ago. Mr. Caldwell? Emily's voice snapped him out of his thoughts. She was at the office door, still in her pajamas, with Luna asleep in her arms. She didn't want to sleep in the guest room, Emily explained. She said she needed to stay close to us, that she was afraid of losing us again. Edward nodded for her to come in. When Emily saw the documents scattered across the table, her face paled. "What's all this?" "Proof," Edward said. "Proof that Luna's telling the truth." He showed her the death record, showed her the daguerreotype, showed her everything he'd found. Emily listened in silence. Luna continued sleeping in her arms, her little face serene, as if she could finally rest after a long journey. When Edward finished, Emily was crying. Silent tears that streamed down her face non-stop. "I have dreams too," she confessed. "Since I was a child. Dreams with a house like that, with a man who loved me, with a daughter I lost. I always thought they were fantasies, wishes of a lonely mind. I never thought they could be memories." Edward stood up. He walked over to her. For a moment, the two stood still, looking at each other, with Luna between them. "I don't know what to do with this," Edward admitted. "I don't know how to process it. I don't know if I'm going crazy, or if I'm finally going sane." "You're not crazy," Emily said, "because if you are, I am too, and Luna too, and shared madness by 3 people isn't madness. It's truth." Luna stirred in Emily's arms. She opened her eyes. She looked at them both with that look that seemed to contain centuries. "Are you fighting?" "No, honey," Emily answered automatically, and stopped. She'd called Luna honey, naturally, as if she'd always done it. "You're figuring it out," Luna said. It's hard at first, I know. I remember how hard it was for me too. Waking up in this little body, remembering everything, remembering you, and not being able to speak, not being able to explain. Having to wait until I found you again. Why didn't you talk? Edward asked. Before you found us, why did you stay silent for so long? Because there was no point in talking, Luna responded simply. No one would understand. And I was waiting for the right people, the only people who would believe. Edward felt his heart clench. You were alone all this time? 5 years remembering another life, without being able to tell anyone? It wasn't so bad, Luna said. I knew you would show up. I promised I would wait, and you promised you would find me. We always keep our promises, and in every life. Emily hugged her tighter, and Edward, without thinking, wrapped them both in his arms. The three stood there together, in the office full of old documents, reunited after 200 years. A family that death had separated. Finally, together again. If this story has already moved you, just wait. Because the most impactful discovery is yet to come. In the following days, Edward hired a historian, someone who could investigate more deeply the history of the Caldwell family in the 19th century. The historian was skeptical at first. Most people would be. But when Edward showed him the documents he'd found and explained what he needed, he accepted the job. 2 weeks later, the historian returned with a complete report. It's extraordinary, he said. Your family has incredibly well-preserved records. I found diaries, letters, even an inventory of the original house. Edward took the report with trembling hands. What about Edward Caldwell from 1820? The historian nodded. Successful merchant. Married to Emily Rojas in 1813. They had a daughter, Luna, in 1815. The family lived in a house in the historic downtown area. A yellow fever epidemic struck the region in 1820. Luna was one of the first victims. The parents died a few days later, probably infected while caring for her. Edward closed his eyes. Every word confirmed what Luna had said. And the house. Does the original house still exist? The historian smiled. That's the most interesting part. Yes, the house still exists. It's been preserved as a historical landmark. It's in the old downtown. In fact, it's a small museum now. Open to the public. Edward looked at Emily. She was pale. We need to go there, he said. I know, she answered. I know. The visit to the museum took place the next day. Edward, Emily, and Luna walked through the streets of the historic downtown until they found the address. And when they found it, Luna stopped. Her eyes widened. Her hands started to tremble, and tears started to stream down her small face. It's here, she whispered. It's our house. The house was exactly as she had described it, as she had drawn it. White walls, now a little faded by time. Blue wooden windows, some needing repair. And in the background, visible through the iron gate, the orange trees in the garden. Luna let go of Emily's hand and walked to the gate. She touched the iron bars as if she were touching something sacred. The fountain is still there, she said, pointing to the patio, where the doves used to come. And the door to my room was up there, the one on the right. With the small window, Edward checked the information in the historian's report. Luna's room was on the second floor. To the right, with a small window, the child couldn't have known that, but there was no way she could have known, unless she really remembered. The museum was open. Edward paid the admission for the three of them, and they entered. The interior had been restored to look as it did in the 19th century. Period furniture, household objects, paintings on the walls. Emily walked as if she were in a dream, or in a memory, touching each object with reverence, with recognition. That was Daddy's chair, she said, pointing to an armchair near the fireplace. He'd sit here after dinners and tell me stories. Edward felt a lump in his throat. He'd also dreamt of that chair, dreamt that he was sitting in it with a little girl on his lap, telling her stories until she fell asleep. And that was Mommy's piano. Emily continued, pointing to an antique piano in the corner of the room. She played it every night and sang songs to help me fall asleep. Valentina made a strangled sound. She'd also dreamt of that piano, dreamt that she was playing, while a little girl drifted off to sleep. The three continued through the museum, Emily pointing, identifying, remembering. Each room brought more memories. Each object confirmed more of the impossible story. And then they reached the second floor. To the room that had been Emily's, the room was small. It had a single bed with a canopy, a small table with a porcelain doll, and on the wall, a picture, a portrait of a family. Emily stopped before the picture, and this time, she didn't cry. This time, she smiled. The most luminous smile Edward had ever seen. "It's us," she said. "Look, Daddy, look. Mommy, it's us." Edward looked at the portrait and felt the world stop. The man in the picture was him, not just similar. It was him, the same eyes, the same face shape, the same expression, as if he were looking into a mirror that spanned 2 centuries. And the woman next to him was Valentina, equally identical, equally impossible to deny, and the girl between them was Emily, the same Emily, who was now standing in the room, pointing at the portrait, smiling as if it were the best surprise in the world. "I told you," Emily said. "I promised I'd remember. I promised I'd find you, and I did." Edward fell to his knees before the portrait. Valentina was beside him, crying silently, and Emily, the daughter they had lost 200 years ago, placed her little hands on their shoulders. "It's okay now," she said. "We're together again, and this time, no one will separate us. The revelation that's coming will change everything. If you're not crying already, you will be." The visit to the museum changed everything, not just for Edward and Valentina, but especially for Emily. After seeing the portrait, after walking through the rooms of the house where she had lived in another life, something inside her calmed down, as if an old wound had finally begun to heal. She started to smile more, to play like a normal 5-year-old, to ask for ice cream and draw butterflies and run through the garden of Caldwell Manor. But at night, before going to sleep, she still told stories. Stories from 1820. Stories that no child should know. "Tell me about the day I was born," she asked Valentina one rainy night. Valentina hesitated. "I don't know, honey. I don't remember." "You do remember," Emily insisted. "Deep down, you just don't know that you remember. Close your eyes and let it come." Valentina closed her eyes, felt Emily's small hand hold hers, and suddenly, like a movie unfolding, she saw a bed with white sheets, pain, a lot of pain, and then a cry, the first cry of a baby, and in her arms, a small, perfect girl, with hazel eyes that looked at her as if she already knew. "Her full moon," Valentina whispered without opening her eyes. "There was a full moon that night, huge, silvery. It came in through the window and lit you up. That's why we chose the name Emily." Emily smiled. "You remembered." Valentina opened her eyes. She was crying. "I remembered." That night, after Emily had fallen asleep, Valentina went to Edward's study. He was there, as always, surrounded by documents, trying to find more pieces of the puzzle. "I remember," she said. Edward looked up. "Remember what?" "Everything. Us, Emily, the house, the life we had. She helped me remember. And now I can't stop. The memories keep coming, one after the other, as if a door had been opened." Edward stood up, walked to her. "I remember too. Remember," he confessed. "More and more. The dreams are more vivid. And when I'm awake, sometimes I see things, flashes, You smiling at me in a way that I shouldn't know. Emily running through the garden in a yellow dress. The three of us together, happy, before everything went wrong. Valentina looked at him, and for the first time, she didn't see her boss. She didn't see the cold, distant millionaire, who barely spoke to his employees. She saw Edward, her Edward, the man she had loved in another life, the man with whom she had built a family, the man who had held her hand as they died. "We died together," she said. "I remember now, at first Emily, and then a few days later, you, and I didn't want to stay without you. So I let go too." Edward closed his eyes. A single tear ran down his face. "I held your hand until the end," he said. "I said I'd find you again, that it didn't matter how long it took, that I'd search until I found you." "And you did," Valentina whispered. "You found me." "No." Edward opened his eyes, looked at her with an intensity that made her tremble. "Emily found us. She kept her promise first. She remembered when we forgot. She waited when we got lost. Our daughter saved us, in 2 different lives. So what do we do now?" Edward held out his hand. Valentina took it. "We stop pretending, stop being boss and employee, stop being 2 strangers who crossed paths by chance, and we start being what we always were." "What's that?" "A family." In the following days, the dynamic at the manor changed completely. Valentina was no longer the housekeeper. She was Valentina. She slept in the room next to Edward's, had breakfast with him and Emily, walked hand in hand with him through the garden while Emily ran ahead. No one questioned it and no one thought it was strange. It was as if the universe had decided that configuration was the correct one, the natural one, the one that should always have been. And Emily blossomed. The girl who didn't speak now chattered non-stop, told jokes, asked questions, invented games. It was as if she finally had permission to be a child. It was as if the weight of 2 lifetimes of memories had been lifted from her tiny shoulders, but there was still a time of day that she treated with reverence, bedtime, every night. She asked for the same thing. "Mommy, play the song you used to play for me, to fall asleep." The first time Lily asked this, Emily panicked. She didn't know how to play the piano. She'd never learned in this life. But Lily insisted. "You know, you've just forgotten. Go to the piano, sit down, and let your fingers remember." Edward had an old piano restored. That was in the attic of Caldwell Manor. It was identical to the one they'd seen in the museum. Identical to the one the original Emily had played. Emily sat down at the piano. She looked at the keys. She had no idea what to do. And then Lily sat down beside her. She put her little head on Emily's shoulder and started humming a melody. It was a lullaby. Old, in archaic Spanish, a song Emily had never heard in this life. But her fingers knew it. They began to move, on their own, finding the right keys, playing chords she didn't know she knew. Accompanied by the melody Lily was humming. And when the music ended, Emily was crying because she had remembered, not just the song, but all the nights she had played it. All the times Lily had fallen asleep listening to those notes. All the love she had put into every chord. "It was real," she whispered. "All of this, what was real. We were real." "We are real," Lily corrected. "We still are. We just changed bodies. But the love didn't change. Love never changes." Edward was in the doorway, watching the scene. And when Emily looked at him, she saw that he was crying too. 3 people, Toasis, 1 family, separated by death for 200 years, reunited by a love that refused to die. If this story hasn't made you cry yet, you've got a heart of stone. Stick around until the end, because what's coming up now is the moment you've been waiting for. Emily discovered Lily's birthmark by accident. She was giving the little girl a bath when she saw it. On her neck, just below her right ear, a dark, irregularly shaped mark. "What's this?" she asked. Lily touched the mark casually. "It's where the fever marked me, before I died. The fever rose, and my skin got so hot that it left a mark. You cried when you saw it. You said it was your fault for not being able to cure me." Emily felt the air leave her lungs. "It wasn't your fault," Lily continued. "There was no cure back then. A lot of people died. All 3 of us died. But it wasn't anyone's fault." Emily hugged the little girl right there, in the bathroom, with water and bubbles everywhere. "I'm so sorry," she whispered. "I'm so sorry. I couldn't save you." "You saved me now," Lily replied. "You found me on the chapel steps and you brought me home. You gave me back my parents. That's saving, Mommy. That's what matters." That night, Edward and Emily talked for hours. About the past, about the present, about the future. "What are we going to do?" Emily asked. "With Lily? Legally. I'm nothing to her. You're nothing to her. She's still an abandoned child, under temporary custody." Edward took her hand. "We're going to adopt her, officially, legally. We're going to give her the name. That's always been hers. Lily Caldwell." "And what about US?" Edward leaned in, kissed Emily's forehead. "As for us, I want to do the same thing that I did in 1813. I want to marry you. I want to spend the rest of this life by your side. And I want us to, when we die again, be together. And that we find each other again, in the next life, and the one after that, and in all the ones that come after." Emily smiled through her tears. "Is that a proposal?" "That's a promise, the same promise I made 200 years ago. But this time, I'm going to keep it, while we're still alive." "And what about Lily? What will she say?" Edward laughed. "Knowing our daughter. She probably already knows. She's probably already planned everything. She's probably in her room, waiting for us to tell her, just so she can say she already knew." They went to Lily's room. The little girl was awake, sitting up in bed, with a huge smile on her face. "You're going to get married," she said, before they could say anything. Edward and Emily looked at each other. "How do you know?" Lily shrugged. "Because you were married before. And this time, it's going to be even more beautiful, because I get to go to the party. Last time, I was too little. I didn't remember. But this time, I'm going to remember forever." She jumped out of bed and hugged them both. "Thank you for finding me again. Thank you for remembering, and thank you for being my parents in every life." Edward lifted Lily into his arms. Emily joined the hug, and the 3 of them stayed there, in the room lit by the moonlight, streaming through the window. A full moon, like the night Lily had been born, for the first time, like the night the Caldwell family finally came back into existence. The adoption process was more complicated than Edward expected, not because of legal issues. He had money, influence, and the best lawyers. The problem was something else. No one had found Lily's biological parents. The police investigated for weeks. The note in her hand had no useful fingerprints. The security cameras at the chapel were broken. And Lily, obviously, couldn't give any information about who had abandoned her. "I don't know who left me there," she said when asked. "I just know that I woke up in that place, and that I had to wait." "Wait for what?" the social worker asked. "For my real parents." The social worker frowned. "You mean your biological parents?" Lily shook her head. "No, my real parents, the ones who really loved me, the ones who have loved me for a long time. The social worker looked at Edward and Emily with a confused expression. They just shrugged. How do you explain something that even they didn't completely understand? In the end, after 3 months of bureaucracy, the judge approved the adoption. Lily Caldwell, officially the daughter of Edward Caldwell and Emily Rojas, when the gavel came down, confirming the decision, Lily did something unexpected. She turned to the judge and said, "Thank you. You don't know it, but you just fixed something. That went wrong, a long time ago." The judge looked confused, but Edward and Emily understood. The family that death had separated in 1820 was finally, legally, reunited. The wedding was scheduled for 3 months later. Edward wanted to have a simple, intimate ceremony. Emily agreed. Lily, however, had other ideas. "It has to be at the house," she insisted. "At our real house, the one from the museum." Edward thought it would be impossible. Museums don't usually lend out their spaces for weddings, but when Edward explained the situation to the director, when he showed the documents, the portraits, the evidence that he was a direct descendant of the family who had lived in that house, the director was absolutely fascinated. A week later, Edward received the authorization. The wedding would be held in the garden of Caldwell Manor, now a museum. The same garden where the first Edward and the first Emily had been married in 1813. 212 years later, in the same place, the same names, the same love. The wedding day dawned sunny. Emily wore a simple, white dress, without many embellishments. Edward wore a dark suit, and Lily, the flower girl, wore a yellow dress. Yellow, she had insisted, like the dress I had before, the dress with flowers. No one questioned it. No one needed to question it. The ceremony was short. The vows were simple. But when the officiant asked if Edward took Emily to be his wife, he said something that wasn't in the script. "I do, as I did in 1813, as I will in every life to come. You are my wife. Always have been, always will be." And when Emily responded, her words echoed his. "I do. As I did when we were young in another life, as I will until the end of time. You are my husband, my soulmate, my home." Lily watched everything with tears in her eyes, but they were tears of happiness, of relief, of a promise finally fulfilled. When the officiant pronounced them husband and wife, Lily ran to them and threw herself into their arms. "Now we're a real family," she said. "Again, forever." The guests applauded. Most didn't understand the full meaning of those words, but Edward, Emily, and Lily knew. They knew that this moment was the conclusion of something that had begun more than 2 centuries ago, a love story that death couldn't destroy. The reception was in the garden of Caldwell Manor, the same mansion where it had all begun, where Emily was the housekeeper, where Lily had appeared and changed everything. Edward had had the portrait from 1820 hung on the main wall of the hall. The first Edward, the first Emily, the first Lily, looking down on all the guests, witnessing the reunion they had waited for so long. Some guests found it ODD, others found it moving, but everyone felt something when they looked at the painting, a sensation that they were witnessing something larger than a simple wedding. And maybe they were. Lily spent the whole party running among the guests, eating cake, dancing with whoever wanted to dance. She was a child, finally, a real child, without the weight of memories from another life, without the responsibility of finding lost parents, without the loneliness of knowing something that no one else knew. She still remembered, still knew who she had been, but now that was just a part of her, not the whole, not the reason to exist. Now she could simply be Lily, Edward and Emily's daughter. The girl who liked yellow dresses and chocolate ice cream and bedtime stories. The girl who was finally home. You still remember everything. Emily asked Lily that night, after the guests had left, from 1820, how it was. Lily thought for a moment. I remember. But it's getting more distant. Like a dream you had a long time ago. You know it happened, but you don't feel like it's real anymore. I think that's how it has to be. We remember enough to find who we need to find, and then we can forget a little. To live this life here, with you. Emily hugged her daughter. You don't have to carry that weight alone anymore. I know, Lily replied. Now I have you to carry it with me. The years passed, as they always do. Too quickly for those who are happy, too slowly for those who wait. Lily grew up, became a teenager, then a young adult. The memories of 1820 became increasingly distant, as she had predicted, until one day, when she was in her early 20s, she realized she could barely remember, and she didn't feel sadness for it. She felt relief. The promise had been fulfilled. The parents had been found. The family had been reunited. She no longer needed to carry those memories. She could simply live. She graduated in psychology, specialized in child therapy. She worked mainly with abandoned children, children who had been left on church steps, in hospitals, in police stations, children like she had been. You have a gift, a colleague said once. The children trust you in a way they don't trust anyone else, as if they know you understand. Lily just smiled. She understood what it was to wait, what it was to search, what it was to finally find, and she dedicated her life to helping other children find their homes, their true homes, whether they were with biological parents or adoptive parents, parents from this life or parents from other lives. The important thing was to find. The important thing was to belong. At 30, Lily got married. The groom was a history professor she had met at a conference on cultural heritage. His name was Michael, and from the first moment they saw each other, they both felt that familiar connection. It wasn't the same connection that Lily had felt with Edward and Emily. It was different, new. It belonged to this life, not to others. But it was equally real, equally powerful. Do you think we've met before? Michael asked on the night of the proposal. Lily smiled. Honestly, I don't think so. I think you're my present. My parents were my past. You're my future. And our children? Lily thought for a moment. Our children will be ours. Completely ours. From this life. From this time. And we'll love them so much that if one day we separate, so we'll find each other again and again until the end of time. Michael hugged her. Sounds like a good promise. It was. And Lily intended to keep it. Lily's wedding was held at Caldwell Manor, the same place where Edward and Emily had been married years before. The same place where the first Edward and Emily had been married in 1813. Edward, now with white hair, walked his daughter down the aisle. Emily cried the entire ceremony. And when the officiant declared Lily and Michael husband and wife, something magical happened. A gentle breeze swept through the garden. The leaves of the orange trees rustled, and for a brief moment, everyone present felt a presence, as if someone invisible was watching, approving, blessing. Emily looked up at the sky and smiled. She knew who they were. The first Edward and Emily, the first Luna, watching from the other side, happy to see the family continue. 2 years later, Emily had her first child, a boy. She named him Edward, after her daddy, and when the baby was born, something happened that Emily never forgot. Edward, the grandfather, held his grandson in his arms for the first time. He looked into the baby's eyes and said, "Hello, little one. I have a feeling we've met before." The baby looked back and smiled, a smile that seemed too old for a newborn. Emily felt a chill. Was history repeating itself? Was the cycle continuing? She would never know for sure. But one thing was certain: the Caldwell family's love transcended generations, transcended lives, transcended even death, and it would continue to transcend forever. Edward and Emily grew old together, in the same Caldwell manor where they had met. In the same Caldwell manor where Emily had appeared and changed everything. They never told the full story to anyone outside the family, not because they were ashamed, but because they knew that most people wouldn't understand, wouldn't believe it. But among themselves, the story was told and retold on wedding anniversaries, at family Christmases, in the quiet moments when they watched the sunset together. "You remember?" Edward would ask. "I remember," Emily would respond. And that was enough. When Edward turned 80, his health began to fail. The heart that had beaten for 2 lives was tired. The doctors did what they could, but some things are beyond medicine. Emily stayed by his side until the end, holding his hand, like he had held her hand back in 1820. "I'll find you again," Edward whispered in his last moments. "I know," Emily replied. "You always do. And next time," he smiled faintly, "maybe I'll remember from the beginning. Maybe I won't need a 5-year-old to point out the obvious." Emily laughed through her tears. "Knowing you, you probably will." Edward closed his eyes, and when he opened them again, and for a brief moment, Emily saw something in them. A youth that didn't belong to this time, a joy that transcended the pain. "I love you," he said, "in all lives." Those were his last words. Emily didn't follow him immediately this time. She stayed another 15 years, saw Emily get married, saw the grandchildren born, saw the Caldwell family grow and prosper, and when her time finally came, she was ready. Luna was by her side, holding her hand, like Emily had held Luna's hand back in 1820. "He's waiting," Emily said. "I can feel it. Daddy's waiting for you." Emily smiled. "You still feel those things?" "Sometimes," Emily admitted. "When it's important, and this is important." Emily closed her eyes, and the last thing she saw before she passed was an image, a vision, a promise. Edward, young again, smiling at her, with a little girl with hazel eyes in his arms. "Took you long enough," he said in the vision. "I know," she replied, "but I'm here now." And together, the 3 of them walked toward the light, the same family, the same love, ready to start again, in another life, in another time, but always together. Emily Caldwell lived to be 93 years old. She had children, grandchildren, great-grandchildren. She told the family story to all of them. Her oldest son, Edward, the grandson who had smiled so peculiarly as a baby, grew up to become a writer. He wrote novels about love and loss, about connections that transcended time, about families separated who found each other again. He could never explain where his stories came from. He said they just appeared, that it felt like he was remembering something, not inventing it. Emily smiled when he said that. Maybe he was remembering. Maybe the memories skipped generations. Maybe the love she had felt for the first Edward and Emily had found a way to keep existing, through her grandson's stories, through the memories he didn't know he had. The last book by Edward, the grandson, was published posthumously. It was called In All Lives. It told the story of a girl who was born remembering her parents from another life, who spent years in silence, waiting, who finally found them, and reunited a family separated by death. It was Emily's story, told by someone who should never have known the details. But he did. Somehow. He knew. The book became a bestseller, millions of copies sold, translated into dozens of languages, and in every country where it was published, readers wrote in saying that they had experienced something similar, that they also remembered, that they also had found. Emily's story wasn't unique. It was just one among thousands, millions maybe. Stories of love that crossed lifetimes, of promises that were kept, of families that refused to stay apart. The story of how she had been left on the doorstep of a chapel, of how she had found her true parents, of how love had crossed 2 centuries to reunite a family. Some believed it. Others thought it was just a pretty story that Grandma liked to tell, but Emily knew the truth. And that was what mattered. On the night she died, she dreamed. She dreamed of a house with white walls and blue shutters, with a garden full of orange trees, with a fountain where doves came to drink water. And at the door of the house, waiting for her, they were there. Edward, young and strong, smiling like he smiled back in 1820. Emily, beautiful as always, with her arms open. "Took you long enough," Edward said. Emily laughed, the same laugh she had when she was 5 years old. "I know. But I needed to live that life to the end. I needed to help other children find their parents. I needed to finish what I started." "And you finished it?" Emily asked. "I finished it," Emily confirmed. She ran to them, jumped into her daddy's arms, hugged her mommy, and the 3 of them stood there together, at the door of the house where they had been happy, where they had died together, where they would always belong. Have you ever felt an instant connection with someone? Have you ever looked into a child's eyes and felt like you knew them from somewhere? Have you ever had the feeling that certain people in your life were destined to be there? Maybe it's not a coincidence, maybe it's memory. Memory of lives you lived before, of people you loved before, of promises you made before. Pay attention to the connections in your life. They might be older than you think. And if you have children, pay attention to what they say, to the stories they tell, to the people they recognize without ever having seen. Children remember. Children know. Children are the bridge between what we were and what we will become. Lily knew. Lily remembered. Lily found. And because of her, a family separated by death 200 years ago could finally be together again. True love never dies. It simply waits. Waits for the next life, for the next chance, for the next meeting. And when it finally finds it, it recognizes immediately, completely, eternally. Like Lily recognized Edward and Emily, like they recognized her, like you might recognize someone someday. Pay attention. The love of your life might be closer than you imagine. If this video moved you, hit that like button. If it made you cry, comment, "I cried." If you also believe that love transcends lives, share it with someone who needs to hear this. And if you've ever had an experience like this, an inexplicable connection, an instantaneous recognition, a love that seemed to come from another time, tell us in the comments, because stories like Lily's, Edward's, and Emily's exist. They happen every day, in all parts of the world. True love finds a way. It always finds a way, in every life.